Hello and welcome to Module 5, the final module for both Phaedo and this area of study.
How amazing.
That is quite exciting. So in Module 4, that epic module that you listened to last week, Socrates and Simmias went on about this idea of the soul being the same thing as an attunement. And as hopefully you all will remember very well, Socrates kind of destroyed poor Simmias's belief that the soul is an attunement for a number of reasons, but used that kind of to strengthen his argument that the soul is immortal.
Indeed, yeah. So in this final part of the text, which is starting on page 151, Socrates is rebutting a vague argument that was briefly raised by Cebes. It's definitely Cebes. So Cebes has raised this argument in a part of the text that we don't need to know, but you do need to know vaguely what his argument was. The argument is that the soul at some point must perish, or in other words, die. And I think he compares the soul to a coat, which it can live for a long time. It can go through a lot of different users or wearers. Similarly, the soul can have a lot of different lives, like with a lot of different bodies, as Socrates has explained. But Cebes has said at some point that coat will decay and start breaking apart and decomposing.
And
so he's saying,
ultimately perish.
And perishing, yep. So he's saying the same must apply to the soul. Socrates is going to rebut that.
It's another lovely analogy.
Yep.
Okay, so starting on page 151 and going for the next couple of pages, Socrates goes through this quite long-winded idea and structure, I guess, of thinking to help him make his ultimate point. And this structure has to do with focusing on particular things, and focusing then on the characteristics of that thing. So he gives a lot of different examples, but say an example as on this slide is the number 3.
Yep.
Right? And the number 3, it has the characteristic of being odd.
An odd number.
Yeah, it is an odd number.
Yep. Okay, cool.
So he then goes that thing...
Number 3.
Yep. Will never take in the opposite of that characteristic. So if you think about the characteristic of a number 3, it's odd. The opposite of that is being even. So the number 3 can never take in that characteristic of being even, because if it was even, it would cease to be 3.
Yeah, okay.
And number 3 can't be even.
Because by definition, it is odd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he describes that as he says that in this case, the number 3 would either get out of the way of that characteristic even or perish. Another good example to think about is, say, like, if your particular thing you're focusing on is snow, the characteristic of that would be it's cold. Yep. The opposite is being hot, I guess, warm. And so the snow, obviously, can never take in the
hotness.
heat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, it would clearly...
So it would cease to be. So it would either have to get out of the way of the heat. So someone would have to protect the snow from the heat.
Yes.
Otherwise, the snow would perish.
Yeah, it's just reminded me of that fantastic song in the movie Frozen. You probably haven't seen Frozen. It is fantastic. But there's this funny little snowman, and he sings about in the summertime or in the summer, and he's just like he's completely oblivious to the fact that heat will make him melt, so he's just like daydreaming about being on a beach and in the summer, like he's going to have this fantastic life, but really he would melt.
He'd have to get out of the way of summer or perish.
Exactly. Okay, so he then is going to apply this argument structure that I've just shown you on the previous slide to the soul. And it's really important to note here that the reason he's applying to the soul and the reason he's picking the characteristics that he is because he believes it's the soul that brings the body to life. So the way he talks about this is that, okay, so you've got a particular thing like a body. It wants to be alive, right? So it's going to bring in something else that has that characteristic of aliveness. So it brings into it the body. And that's the
soul, yeah.
And the soul is what brings to the body aliveness. Okay?
Right.
Life.
So the soul is intrinsically alive.
Yes.
It will always be alive.
Which is a really interesting point that I want us to hold on to and come back to, because that's a big claim, isn't it? That the soul, so basically saying...
Well, it's an assumption, again, isn't it?
Again,
yeah,
definitely. So the source of our life is our soul. Very different to, say, Armstrong with his crazy science.
Completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like his obsession with science would go completely against this, being like, no, we need a soul to live.
Yeah, well, he would say once the body dies, then the mind dies.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's no life without the body.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's really interesting.
So, and then key to that is that, and what we need to know is that the soul has this characteristic of aliveness.
So that, just like 3, the characteristic of 3 was odd, or
Yes.
snow was coldness.
Yep.
The characteristic of soul is aliveness.
Yep. So if we chuck that into the little structure, so he's got the soul, its characteristic is aliveness. So then you think, okay, well, what's the opposite of aliveness? Deadness. His language. It's really clunky. And so he's then going to be like, well, okay, if we go based on what we've just said, that thing that you're looking at can never take in the opposite of its characteristic. So it can never take on the deadness.
Yep.
So that we can clearly see where this is going to lead us. So we get to, if the soul will never let deadness in, then the soul must be deathless. Again, weird words. And if the soul is deathless, then it is immortal. So yet again, and we really want you to take this in, he is establishing that the soul is immortal. So he's actually, if we think back, he's actually done that in quite a number of ways now.
He's done it in...
At least 3.
At least 3, yeah. We're trying to think of them all.
Yes. So by thinking about the soul as divine...
Then it must be immortal.
And yeah, then it must be, yeah. And by rejecting Simius's argument that it's an attunement...
He's saying that it's immortal because it
doesn't perish.
It doesn't perish before the body perishes. Yeah.
And now he's saying because it will always avoid, it will never take in the deadness.
Yo, I just thought of an evaluation.
Oh.
Well, oh gosh. Socrates, what the heck? The whole premise for this argument is that the soul equals aliveness. It's another circular argument.
Okay.
Because he's already established the soul is alive.
Okay.
Don't you think?
So to fix that, would he just not need like an extra premise or something where he includes that proof that the soul's alive?
He would need a mini argument to prove that the characteristic of the soul is aliveness.
Okay.
Where does he get that from? Like, he's basically gone from saying the characteristic of the soul is aliveness to, therefore, the soul is deathless. Well, whoop-de-do. Like, that's not a huge leap.
Okay. So what was most important to that argument being impressive would be his proof that the soul is aliveness.
Which we haven't seen.
Fair call.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's what we do here, just take down the greatest philosophers of all time.
I actually quite like Paul Socks.
Oh, yeah, he's a great guy. And remember, he's saying all of this stuff just before he dies.
Yes, yeah. He's leading up to his death, poor guy.
I know, he's amazing.
Poor guy. But really, like, Plato's version of his death.
Yeah. So really, it's kind of Plato's philosophy
in
a way.
God knows when he said this, if he said this. Okay, let's not confuse the poor people. All right.
Okay. So
conclusion, the soul
will never perish.
Okay, and he comes to that on page 154. And that is good old Phaedo.
Is that it?
Yeah. Farewell.
So how do you feel? You've done 3 texts so far, philosophers. I hope you're feeling accomplished.
Yeah, there's only 8 left. How sad. How sad.
2 of them are super short. They're like 2 pages each.
The good old Buddhist ones.
Yeah, but we'll get through them. We're good.
Yeah.
We'll see Socrates again in Unit 4, The Good Life.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that a lot of these ideas, particularly around having the best kind of soul, are probably really
he comes back to the soul in Gorgias.
Yeah. Cool. Farewell.